Hello, my dear friends. Tonight, I'm going to reveal a true story from a time so dark and haunting that it might send chills down your spine. There was an era, centuries ago, when women in medieval brothels lived lives most of us can hardly imagine. In those shadowy rooms, lit by dim candles, there was no concept of cleanliness or comfort. Water was scarce, medicine was unknown, and pain was simply a part of survival. Many women were forced to keep working even when they were ill or suffering. They had no choice, no freedom, and no one ever asked them how they felt. Their lives were ruled by silence, and the walls around them held secrets that history almost forgot. Imagine the air heavy with heat, sweat, and despair. Every night felt endless. Every morning came without hope. Yet they endured, quietly, invisibly, through wounds, sorrow, and shame. Tonight, I'll take you back to that forgotten world, the hidden corners of the Middle Ages where the stories of these women still whisper through time. So before we begin, lie down somewhere quiet, dim the lights, turn down the noise around you, and let yourself travel with me back to an age where survival itself was a story of pain, silence, and strength. And if you find this story moving, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment where you're listening from. I'll be waiting to reply to you personally. Now, let's begin. The Forgotten Pain. The night was heavy, the air thick with the scent of sweat, smoke, and something darker, something that clung to the skin and refused to wash away. Inside a narrow stone building, hidden in a medieval town's back alley, dozens of women moved like ghosts under flickering candlelight. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow, their bodies exhausted from nights that never seemed to end. This was not a place of pleasure, though the world called it one. It was a place of survival. The rooms were small, barely enough for a bed, a wooden bucket, and a piece of cloth that served as a curtain. The walls were damp with mildew. Rats scurried under the straw-covered floors. In winter, the cold bit through every layer of skin. In summer, the air grew foul and suffocating. Yet, every night, the same ritual began again. The women here had no names the world remembered. They were simply the girls, the women, the sinners. But behind those labels were stories of hunger, abandonment, and desperation. Many had been sold by their families to pay off debts. Some were orphans who had nowhere else to go. A few had once been wives, until poverty or tragedy left them alone. They shared one truth: no one cared what happened to them. Clean water was a luxury they couldn't afford. The only liquid they often had was stale ale or cheap wine. They used alcohol to clean themselves, not out of choice, but necessity. A few drops poured onto a rag, rubbed harshly against the skin, burning open wounds, leaving behind the sting of both pain and humiliation. The same cloth was used again and again, shared among them, washed rarely, if ever. The smell of sweat mixed with alcohol hung in the air, along with the bitter scent of hopelessness. When a woman fell ill, she wasn't allowed to rest. The keeper of the house, usually an older woman hardened by years of cruelty, would tell her, "Pain is not an excuse. You work or you don't eat." So even on nights when fever burned through their veins, even when their bodies trembled with sickness, they had to smile. Their pain had no audience. Their tears had no worth. During their monthly bleeding, they were expected to continue working. There were no clean linens, no separate quarters. They tore small pieces of old cloth, reuse them until they were soaked through, then wash them in the same basin that served every purpose, from washing hands to cleaning wounds. Infection was constant. Many women developed sores that never healed. The candlelight revealed bruises and scars that no one spoke about. Some came from customers, others from the keeper's whip. Silence was survival. Speaking up meant punishment, or worse, being thrown out into the streets where starvation awaited. At night, the sounds of laughter and music drifted from the taverns outside, while inside the brothel there was only whispers and sighs, half pain, half resignation. The women often comforted each other when the doors were finally locked. They shared pieces of bread, a few kind words, or the rare moment of laughter. It was their only way to feel human again. Sometimes, when the town slept, one of them would look out through a small window slit and stare at the moon, the same moon that shone over kings and queens, over castles and feasts. She would wonder, did the world outside even know she existed? Would anyone ever remember her name? There were moments of unbearable stillness, when even the air seemed to mourn. A cough from the next room, the soft sound of sobbing behind a curtain, these became the soundtrack of their nights. And yet they endured, not out of strength, but because there was no other choice. Endurance became their only form of rebellion. Every breath they took was proof that they still existed in a world that had erased them. Sometimes a new girl arrived, young, frightened, her hands trembling as she held the thin dress they gave her. The older women would look at her silently, remembering the day they first arrived. They wanted to warn her, to tell her how quickly innocence fades within these walls, but they said nothing, because in this world, hope was dangerous. There was one woman, they said, who used to hum softly every night. Her voice was low, tender, almost like a prayer. She would hum for those who had lost their voices, for the ones who had been taken and forgotten. One winter night, she fell sick and never rose again. They buried her behind the brothel, without a name or a marker, but for weeks after, the others swore they could still hear her song in the dark. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was memory refusing to die. In the flickering light of dawn, as the candles melted into puddles of wax, the women would clean themselves again, the same old cloth, the same burning alcohol. They would wipe the blood, the sweat, the tears, and prepare for another day that offered no promise of change. Outside, life continued as if they didn't exist. The church bells rang, merchants opened their stalls, and the streets filled with chatter. No one looked toward the narrow alley where history hid its shame. But behind those walls, the women continued to live, to suffer, to whisper. And those whispers have never truly gone silent. They echo through time, through the forgotten corners of history, reminding us that pain, too, has a memory. They were nameless, they were unseen, but they were real.
Chains of flesh and silence. The brothel woke before dawn. The sound of footsteps, of wooden buckets clattering against stone, echoed through the narrow hallways. A cold draft crept in through the cracks in the walls, making the women shiver beneath their thin sheets. The candles had burned out hours ago, leaving only the faint gray of early morning filtering through the dust. The keeper's voice thundered down the corridor, harsh, commanding, merciless. "Up! The floors must be cleaned before the first customers arrive." And so they rose, one by one. Their bodies ached, some limped, some coughed blood into their hands. Others clutched at their stomachs, where bruises bloomed like dark flowers. There was no rest, no tenderness, only repetition, the same motions, the same pain, day after day. They moved silently, washing the floors with rags already soaked in dirt, using the same water that had been used to clean the night before. The smell of stale alcohol and sickness filled the air. These women had learned the language of silence. Silence when the men entered. Silence when pain tore through them. Silence when they were struck, insulted, or discarded. In this place, silence was not peace, it was survival. The men who came were not lovers, nor even human in their eyes. They were shadows wrapped in arrogance, soldiers, merchants, priests, travelers. They came to forget their own misery by inflicting it on others. To them, the women were not people. They were flesh to rent, not souls to recognize. Some men were cruel. They hit, bit, or burned. Others whispered false words of affection, only to break them moments later. And some were simply indifferent, using a woman's body like a tool, leaving behind only emptiness. When the door closed behind each man, the silence that followed was heavier than any scream. The women would lie there for a moment, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember who they had once been before the world took their names. They were covered in marks, not just on their skin, but deep within their spirit. Their hearts had learned to beat quietly, afraid of being heard. Their tears had dried long ago, replaced by a numbness that felt safer than hope. At times, one of them would whisper, "Do you remember the smell of flowers?" And another would smile faintly, "I think I've forgotten." But even in this pit of despair, a strange form of sisterhood existed. They shared what little they had, a piece of bread, a small sip of wine, a whispered prayer. When one of them fell sick, the others would sit beside her, cooling her forehead with a damp cloth. No doctors ever came. The brothel keeper said medicine was wasted on used goods. One winter night, a girl named Lisbeth tried to escape. She had been brought from a nearby village, barely 16. She waited until the town fell asleep, then slipped through the back door, barefoot, clutching the torn cloak around her shoulders. By dawn, they found her. The guards dragged her back, her face bruised, her feet bleeding from the cobblestones. The keeper ordered her punishment in front of everyone. No one dared look away. Afterwards, Lisbeth could no longer speak. Her voice, once soft and full of life, was gone. She would sit near the window every night, her eyes fixed on the stars, as if trying to find a place where her soul could rest. The others never spoke of that night again, but they remembered. There was another woman, older, named Mirella. She had been there longer than anyone else. Her hair was silvering, her hands thinned as bone. Yet there was something in her eyes, a quiet fire that refused to die. When the younger ones broke down, Mirella would tell them, "Close your eyes. Imagine a river. Imagine the sound of it, cold, clean, endless. Someday, you'll reach it." They didn't believe her, but her words were like a fragile rope, something to hold on to when everything else collapsed. Outside, the world continued, as if the women inside didn't exist. The market buzzed, bells rang, children laughed, but if one listened closely, in the stillness between the church chimes, one might almost hear the faint echoes of their suffering, carried on the wind. Inside the brothel, the night began again. The candles were lit, their light trembling like frightened hearts. The door creaked open. Another man entered. The women took their places, painted smiles over bruised lips, hid their pain behind lowered eyes. Each step, each breath was a negotiation with fate. Some nights one of them would whisper prayers under her breath, not to God, but to the moon. The moon, after all, saw everything. It watched from above, night after night, as they were broken and remade, forgotten and reborn in pain. If the moon could speak, perhaps it would tell their stories, the ones history erased. It would speak of chains not made of iron, but of flesh, of silence, of shame. And maybe, just maybe, it would remind the world that these women, though unseen, though unnamed, had hearts that once beat with dreams, laughter, and love. They were more than what the world reduced them to. They were the silent witnesses of a cruel era, and their pain still lingers in the echoes of stone and time.
The hidden rituals of survival. The brothel was alive with silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that clung to the walls, the straw-strewn floors, and the women who moved through it like shadows. The air was thick with sweat, smoke, and the faint, sour odor of bodies unwashed for days. Here, every breath carried a memory of pain. Every step was a negotiation with decay. Clean water was a rare treasure. A single wooden bucket might serve the needs of 10 women for an entire week. They would take turns, pouring what little liquid they had over their hands, faces, and bodies. Some days it was cold rainwater collected from the rooftops. Other days it was the dregs of beer or cheap wine, repurposed as both cleanser and disinfectant. The ritual of washing was slow, almost ceremonial, not out of reverence, but necessity. Each movement was precise, honed by years of repetition. They had to scrub themselves with rags that had been used over and over again, the fabric stiff with dirt and blood. Alcohol, the bitter sting, became a trusted companion. It burned, but it killed what little germs the water could not. And yet, it was never enough. Men came every night, leaving their mark on their skin, bruises, cuts, infections. They were the silent proof of battles no one else would witness. After a long night, their bodies screamed for relief, for simple warmth, for softness, for clean water, but there was none. Only the ritual, repeated in silence, in secret. During their monthly bleeding, the pain intensified, but the work did not stop. The keeper made it clear menstruation was no excuse. They tore scraps of old cloth to fashion makeshift pads, washed them sparingly in the same buckets, and wrapped themselves in a thin layer of fabric to hide what the world would never acknowledge. Every step was a reminder of their vulnerability. Every glance in the cracked mirror revealed a body that had been used, abused, and then expected to endure anew. Bathing was an event of rare privilege. A basin filled once a week, or even less, was a luxury they shared quietly. One by one, they immersed themselves, submerging aching limbs into cold brown water, rubbing at the stains of life that clung stubbornly to their skin. Some whispered prayers, others simply held their breath and counted the seconds, hoping the water would wash away more than dirt, hoping it might cleanse the shame, the fear, the weight of endless nights. The walls of their rooms held secrets that no one would ever hear. In these moments, the women would tilt their heads, close their eyes and remember a time before this place existed. A mother's hand brushing hair back, the smell of fresh bread, a laughter carried on the wind. But such memories were dangerous luxuries. They reminded the heart of what it had lost. Even in these private rituals, the specter of shame never left. Every touch, every movement was cautious. The very act of cleaning oneself, so intimate and necessary, became a small rebellion, something the world had denied them. They treated it with a sacred sort of care, knowing that their bodies, their hidden selves, were the only possessions left untouched. Sometimes they would exchange glances while bathing, small nods of solidarity. These silent gestures carried entire conversations. I see you. I understand. It was a language of survival, learned under the most brutal of circumstances. The touch of a hand, the passing of a clean rag, the careful attention to someone else's wounds, these were acts of compassion hidden from the eyes of the world. And yet the work never paused. The first customers would arrive at dusk, and the day's rituals had to be completed in time. Hands scrubbed, bodies rubbed with alcohol, rags twisted and wrung out, hair tied back, faces made neutral, eyes lowered. The world outside would never know the effort it took to prepare for a single hour of invisibility, a single hour of bearing pain without protest. Even in sleep, they were never free. Dreams were fragmented by echoes of the day, a hand too rough, a voice too harsh, a glance that cut deeper than any knife. They awoke with bruises, with wounds that refused to heal, and still the ritual continued. Alcohol, water, rags, the triad of endurance. Their courage was quiet, almost invisible. They learned to honor the smallest victories, a clean corner of floor, a rag that had survived another day, a moment of laughter when no one was looking. These fragments became the threads that stitched their spirits together, even as the world sought to tear them apart. And through it all, they survived. Not because the world cared, not because they were strong by choice, but because survival had become their art. Every drop of water, every sting of alcohol, every reused rag told a story of endurance, a story that whispered of resilience, of quiet rebellion, of human dignity under siege. And perhaps in those rare, stolen moments, when the bucket was filled, the candle flickered, and the night held its breath, they could feel, just for a moment, that they were still alive, that, despite everything, they still mattered. The brothel was more than a prison. It was a place where pain was catalogued, where shame was rehearsed, and yet where the human spirit quietly whispered back, refusing to be erased. No one outside would ever know. No history book would record the details, but within those narrow walls, amidst the stench and the shadows, life persisted in secret. And in these hidden rituals, they clung not just to survival, but to themselves, the parts the world could not take, the moments the world could not see, and the dignity that lived quietly in every scar, every rag, and every drop of water.
The night was quiet, but inside the brothel, hearts were restless. A few girls dared to dream, even for a moment. Liesel pressed her hands against the windowsill and imagined the streets beyond the walls. The newest girls watched in silence. They had seen fear and pain, but now they felt something new, possibility. For the first time, some believed escape might be real. Older women guided them carefully,
Mirella whispered tips in low voices. Move slowly, watch the doors, keep your courage close. Every word was small, but it gave strength. The girls planned quietly. They observed the guards, memorized the schedules, and whispered strategies in hidden corners. Even imagining freedom became a lifeline. One night, Liesel and two others found a weak latch on the back window. It was tiny, almost invisible. They pressed their fingers against it, feeling the cool metal. The thought of leaving filled them with fear and hope at the same time. The danger was real. If caught, the punishment would be severe. But the girls had learned subtle rebellion. They moved like shadows, whispered in code, and hid their small victories in silence. Even small gestures became acts of defiance. A shared glance, a hidden piece of bread, a hand on a shoulder. Each one was a quiet claim of independence. The older women watched proudly. These small acts of courage were important. They were teaching the youngest girls that freedom could begin in their hearts, even if the body was still trapped. That night, the girls whispered stories of open fields, rivers, and skies wider than their rooms. They spoke of laughter, music, and light. Each story became a secret promise that life existed beyond these walls. Morning came, and with it the routine. They washed themselves carefully, scrubbed the floors, and prepared to face another day. But inside, something had changed. The spark of hope had been lit. Some girls dared to smile. Some dared to hold their heads high. The smallest acts reminded them that they were still human, still capable of choosing courage. Even in the darkest moments, their spirits refused to be fully broken. Every whispered plan, every glance, every tiny act of rebellion strengthened them. By nightfall, Liesel returned to the window. She pressed her face close to the glass and imagined running through the streets. She imagined breathing fresh air, feeling the sun on her skin. The others joined silently, each imagining a life they had only seen in stories. The brothel remained a prison, but the girls had discovered something stronger than walls. Hope, courage, the knowledge that even in captivity, the spirit could be free. The men could take their time, their youth, their comfort, but not their will. That remained theirs, quiet and unbroken. And in that fragile dawn, the girls realized something vital. Freedom begins not only with leaving, but with holding on to oneself, silently, bravely, every day. Through whispered plans, secret smiles, and tiny victories, they reclaimed parts of themselves. They learned that survival and defiance could coexist, and perhaps one day, those tiny sparks would become flames. Even if the world outside never noticed, they knew this truth. They were more than what had been taken from them. They were courage. They were endurance. They were hope.
Sometimes the youngest girls arrived already carrying a secret of life within them. Pregnancy in the brothel was terrifying. It was a reality few survived quietly, and the girls learned to hide their growing bodies as long as they could. The keeper had no mercy. Any sign of pregnancy could mean punishment, loss of privileges, or even eviction. So the girls learned early. Concealment was survival. They wore loose clothing, avoided the public eye, and moved with careful steps. Older women shared quiet guidance. They showed how to hide swelling, how to manage pain, and how to carry on with daily chores. It was not a matter of choice. It was a matter of staying alive. Food was scarce, but the girls had to eat carefully. Too much attention could be dangerous. They rationed small bites, hid morsels for later and avoided raising suspicion. Even drinking water required caution, especially during hot months. The brothel itself became a delicate balance. Some rooms were kept slightly warmer or quieter so the girls could rest without drawing notice. Older women often sat nearby, ready to help if labor began unexpectedly. Every moment was tense, every breath careful. Labor, when it came, was mostly alone or with only another woman present. There were no doctors, no midwives. Pain was endured in silence. Sometimes a small cloth was dampened and held to the lips, and a whispered prayer offered to the unknown. The infants, if born alive, faced grim realities. They were often hidden or passed quietly to neighbors or trusted contacts outside. Survival for the child depended entirely on secrecy and the goodwill of someone willing to help. The girls learned to detach, in part to protect their hearts. Loving openly was dangerous. But even in detachment, a mother's instinct remained. Every care given, every hidden comfort was an act of courage and endurance. Even daily chores became more complicated. They carried water carefully, cleaned floors with precision, and avoided any movements that might reveal their condition. Every routine was adapted for survival, every gesture calculated. Despite the fear, some girls found small strength in one another. Older women whispered encouragement. "You are stronger than you think," they said. "Every moment you endure is proof of that." The psychological burden was immense. Shame, fear, and exhaustion weighed heavily. Yet in these moments of hidden endurance, they learned quiet resilience. They discovered that even under oppression, human spirit could find ways to survive. And in those secret, silent hours, they imagined life differently. Some dreamed of escape. Others imagined a world where motherhood would not be punished, where children could be safe. Those dreams were fragile, but they were enough to keep them moving forward. The brothel remained a prison, yet even here, life persisted. Courage, secrecy, and solidarity became survival tools. Every hidden step, every careful gesture, every whispered piece of guidance was a small victory against a world that had taken so much from them.
The youngest girls arrived trembling. Their eyes were wide with fear. Everything was new. The room smelled strange. The floors were cold, and the rules were clear. Obedience, silence, and constant readiness. The older women watched them closely. Every movement was observed, every mistake noted. But in their eyes there was also understanding. They had been here once. They knew the terror. And slowly, they began to teach. Training began with the simplest tasks: carrying water, cleaning floors, arranging straw, folding old cloth. The girls learned to move quietly, to speak only when necessary, and to keep their gaze low. Every action had to be precise. Every misstep could draw attention or punishment. The older women whispered tips: scrub carefully, don't spill the water, keep the floors clean. These words seemed small, almost ordinary, but they held the weight of survival. They taught the girls that even tiny actions mattered. Hygiene was taught carefully. The girls learned to wash themselves with limited water. They rubbed old cloths over their skin, cleaned their hands and faces, and tried to hide bruises or scratches. Each gesture was a lesson in endurance. They learned to protect themselves quietly. Gradually, the girls were introduced to the other routines. Meals were sparse and had to be rationed. Clothes were old and worn, but they had to be kept as clean as possible. Every movement was calculated. Even drinking water required care. When the first exposure to clients arrived, fear gripped their hearts. They were small, young, and unprepared. The older women guided them silently. Keep calm, lower your eyes, breathe slowly. These instructions were repeated in corners, in whispers that no one else could hear. The first interactions were terrifying. They learned to mask fear with neutral expressions. Every gesture had to hide the trembling within. They learned to nod, to smile faintly, and to respond only with the words that were safe. They discovered that their emotions could be hidden, that the body could obey while the heart screamed. Some girls were better at learning than others. Some clung to the older women's hands, drawing courage from their calm presence. Others relied on small signals, an encouraging glance, a nod, or a gentle touch. These moments of solidarity became vital. They whispered advice, shared water, or adjusted a stray piece of cloth. Every small act became a lifeline. Days passed, and the girls learned to endure longer periods. They scrubbed floors until their hands ached. They carried buckets of water, balancing them carefully. They learned to anticipate the needs of the building and the clients. They learned to move quickly, but quietly. They learned that every hour required vigilance. The psychological toll was heavy. Loneliness settled like a fog. Anxiety hovered over every step. Shame and fear were constant companions. Yet in these moments, subtle bonds formed. The girls began to recognize each other, to share small comforts, to teach tricks they had learned. They found strength in one another. The older women encouraged small victories. A clean floor, a task completed without error, a tiny smile shared in secret. All were celebrated quietly. Courage was built slowly, in hidden ways. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a proof of endurance. Even in this harsh environment, imagination remained. Some girls whispered stories of their homes. Others dreamed of open fields or rivers, of skies wider than the ceilings above. These thoughts were fragile, secret, but they gave them something to hold on to, something to fight for. The youngest girls learned quickly. They learned which gestures drew attention and which were safe. They discovered that patience, observation, and careful calculation could save them from punishment. They realized that survival required not just physical skill, but mental strength. Through mentorship, whispered advice, and small acts of courage, the girls began to understand something vital. Even in the darkest places, they could retain a sense of self. Even here, in the narrow rooms and crowded hallways, dignity could be preserved. They could endure. They could survive. By the end of the chapter, the girls were changed. They had learned to move silently, to mask fear, and to follow the lessons of the older women. They had begun to discover their own strength. Each small task, each careful gesture, each hidden smile was a step toward resilience. And though the brothel remained a prison, the girls had started to carve a space for themselves, a space where courage lived quietly, where endurance was learned, and where survival was possible. Even in shadows, light existed. Even in fear, hope flickered. And for the youngest girls, every whispered lesson, every quiet encouragement, and every small victory became a building block of strength.
The youngest girls moved carefully through the hall. Their steps were soft. Their eyes watched everything. Fear was still present, but it was quieter now. Daily routines became familiar. They fetched water, cleaned floors, and folded cloth. Each task taught patience. Each small success built confidence. Older women guided them in whispers. Move slowly, watch carefully, keep calm. These words were simple, but they carried lessons of survival. The girls learned to observe. They noticed the guards' schedules. They watched doors and windows. Every movement mattered. Small gestures became acts of courage. A glance held too long, a secret smile, a chore done perfectly. These were invisible victories. Hygiene was carefully managed. Water was rationed. Cloths were reused. Small cuts were hidden and treated quietly. Each action kept them safe. First exposure to clients was frightening. The girls learned to control their faces. Their eyes lowered. Their voices were soft. Every reaction was measured. Older women whispered advice. Breathe slowly. Watch the patterns. Stay steady. These lessons became a shield. Fear was still present, but skill grew. Even the youngest girls found courage. They anticipated tasks. They moved quietly. They hid small mistakes. Each success made them stronger. The girls whispered to each other in secret corners. Be careful. Watch. Remember. These words created trust. Solidarity grew quietly. Subtle independence emerged. Small victories mattered. A floor scrubbed well. A bucket carried without spilling. A task finished before instruction. Each one was a proof of strength. Observation became a tool. The girls learned when to speak and when to stay silent. Every glance, every step, every gesture was calculated. Mentorship deepened. Older women shared guidance silently. They corrected mistakes gently. They celebrated victories with small, unseen gestures. Psychological growth followed. Anxiety still existed. Loneliness persisted. But trust in oneself increased. Courage grew quietly, like a hidden flame. Evening brought whispered stories. Rivers, fields, open skies. Dreams of freedom. Dreams of a life beyond the walls. These thoughts gave strength. By the end of the chapter, the youngest girls had changed. They moved silently. They masked fear. They followed lessons carefully. They had discovered resilience. The brothel remained a cage, but power existed in small actions. Patience, observation, quiet courage. Every small victory became a step toward freedom. Even in the shadows, hope remained. Even in fear, courage existed. Every whispered lesson, every careful gesture, every small act of bravery became a building block of survival.
The day began slowly. The hallways were quiet, the air thick with warmth. The youngest girls moved carefully. Every step was measured. Fear lingered, but routine brought a small sense of control. Water was scarce. Buckets were shared. A single bucket might be used by many over and over. Each girl learned to make the most of it. She would dip her hands, wash her face, and carefully rinse. Then pass the water along. Nothing was wasted. The bathrooms were tiny, dark and damp. Floors were cold and often wet. The smell lingered, but the girls had no choice. Privacy was rare. They learned to wait their turn, to move with quiet efficiency, and to avoid drawing attention. Cleaning was a ritual. Every inch mattered. Hands, face, arms, legs. Hidden areas were scrubbed with cloths. Old rags were washed and reused. Water was poured carefully, a few drops at a time. They learned to conserve while still maintaining cleanliness.
Some girls carried small scraps of cloth for private cleansing. They would wet them in buckets and rub carefully, repeating the process. It was slow, tiring, but necessary. Each wash was a small act of control in a life full of restrictions. Toilets were shared and minimal. A corner of the building served the purpose. Floors were stone, cold and rough. The girls learned to cover themselves quickly to avoid others' eyes. Patience was required. Humiliation could be avoided with careful timing. The physical toll was constant. Long hours, repeated bending, scrubbing floors, carrying buckets, and managing personal hygiene took strength. Sore hands, tired backs, and aching feet were normal. Yet the girls endured. Every task completed without error became a small victory. They learned tricks from the older women. "Dip the cloth twice," they whispered. "Rinse only what you can manage. Use the water slowly." These lessons passed in whispers, but they were crucial. Every drop saved, every hidden corner cleaned, was part of survival. Mental endurance grew alongside the physical. Waiting for a turn in the bathroom required patience. Observing others, calculating when to move, conserving energy, all of it became part of daily life. The girls learned to anticipate, to plan small steps carefully, and to move with silent confidence. Hygiene was more than cleaning. It was dignity. A clean face, a scrubbed arm, a hidden spot washed carefully. Each gesture was proof that they retained some control over themselves. Even in confinement, small rituals became acts of self-respect. The younger girls began to notice subtle solidarity. One girl would hold a cloth ready for another. Someone might cover a turn in the bathroom with whispered words or a careful glance. These small gestures created trust, and trust became strength. Water had to be reused carefully. Buckets were rarely refilled immediately. The first use might be for hands, the next for face, and finally for private areas. Every drop counted. Waste was dangerous. Attention could draw punishment. The girls learned precision. Despite exhaustion, they found rhythm. Daily grooming became a sequence, almost automatic. Each movement practiced and perfected. They scrubbed, rinsed, washed, and reused. The act was tiring, but in repetition, confidence grew. Small victories mattered. A completely scrubbed arm, a clean face, a hidden spot washed without discovery. Each achievement was silently celebrated. The girls felt pride, even if no one else noticed. These rituals were private victories, personal markers of endurance. The bathroom corners were shadows of quiet determination. Girls bent, scrubbed, and washed with careful attention. They whispered prayers or soft encouragements to themselves. Even in scarcity, they maintained cleanliness, modesty, and a sense of humanity. Time in the bathroom became a rare moment of autonomy. Within these minutes, the girls decided the pace, the method, and the order of cleaning. They controlled what they could, and in that control, they found strength. Older women continued to guide silently. Conserve water, scrub carefully, watch your neighbors, move slowly. These instructions helped avoid mistakes, preserve dignity, and maintain survival. These whispered lessons were lifelines. The girls discovered patience, precision, and endurance through these hidden rituals. Each day they became more efficient. They learned to read the room, to time their movements, to anticipate the needs of others and the limits of water. Even exhaustion could not break their resolve. The cold stone floors, the reused cloths, the scarcity of water, all were challenges they faced with quiet strength. Every completed washing ritual was a testament to survival. And in these private, repeated moments, a pattern emerged. Cleanliness became courage. Endurance became dignity. Quiet strength was measured not in defiance, but in precision, patience, and persistence. By the end of the day, the girls were physically tired, but mentally stronger. They had learned to maintain themselves even in the harshest conditions. Every small act of hygiene, every careful use of water, every whispered tip from older women reinforced resilience. Even in the shadows, even in scarcity, hope lingered. Each bucket, each scrub, each private ritual was more than survival. It was proof that they still held pieces of themselves, pieces that no one could take. The routines, difficult and exhausting, became a source of pride. And in that pride, in the quiet mastery of hidden rituals, the girls discovered strength that could not be broken. Night had fallen again. The house was quiet, but not silent. Somewhere in the dark, a faint whisper moved through the halls, a whisper of women talking, laughing softly, sharing stories that no one else would ever hear. They were not allowed to dream, but they did, in silence. When the candles burned low and the noise outside faded, they found each other. In a world that forgot them, they became each other's memory. The older women taught the younger ones how to endure. "Keep your head low," one would whisper. "Save your tears for the night," said another. Their voices were calm, their faces tired, but their eyes still carried something alive, something that refused to break. Each night, when the doors closed, they gathered in the corners of their small rooms. A candle flickered. They sat close, their knees touching. Sometimes they shared bread, sometimes only silence. But that silence was filled with understanding, a kind of language built out of pain and kindness. One girl would brush another's hair, another would mend a torn dress, and for a brief moment they were not workers, not prisoners, just women, breathing, surviving together. The younger ones often cried in secret. They missed their homes, their mothers, the scent of open fields. The older ones didn't tell them to stop crying. They just held their hands until the tears ran dry, because in this place no one had the luxury to fall apart. Every small act of care was rebellion, a shared blanket, a song hummed under the breath, a piece of bread broken in half. Each gesture said, "You are not alone." When morning came, they would rise again, tie their hair, wash their faces with the same cold water, and face another day. The world outside would see nothing but silence, but beneath that silence lived a network of strength, invisible, unshakable, and deeply human. They gave each other names, secret names that belonged only to them, names that made them feel alive. Some called each other by the names of flowers, rose, lily, daisy, names that reminded them of sunlight and gardens they might never see again. At night,
Laughter sometimes filled the air, quiet, cautious laughter that sounded like wind brushing through dry leaves. It wasn't the laughter of joy, it was the laughter of survival, the kind that kept the soul from breaking completely. They told stories, too, stories of places they once knew, a village by a river, a mother's voice calling at dusk, a little girl running through the fields barefoot. Each story was a spark, lighting up the darkness for a moment. The stories would begin softly, and then grow louder, warmer. Someone would smile, someone would sigh, and for a brief time they felt human again. Sometimes, when one of them fell sick, the others stayed close. They shared herbs, bits of fabric, warm water. They whispered prayers learned long ago, not to gods, but to memories. The touch of another hand was a reminder, you're still here, you still matter. No one outside ever saw their kindness. History forgot their names, but inside those walls, they built something that even time could not destroy, compassion. One woman, known simply as Mara, was like a quiet leader. Her words were few, but when she spoke, everyone listened. She would say, "We are still women. No one can take that from us." Those words carried through the darkness like a small flame. When storms came and thunder shook the sky, they huddled together. The sound of rain on the roof was strangely comforting. It was as if the world outside was crying with them. Sometimes in those moments they would sing, softly, old songs from forgotten villages, songs about love, about waiting, about home. Their voices blended, fragile yet powerful, echoing through the old wooden walls. It was not music for the ears, it was music for survival. They had no mirrors, but they looked at each other and saw reflections of strength, of pain, of endurance. Every scar told a story. Every tired face was proof of a battle quietly fought. The younger girls learned from the older ones how to hide pain behind poise, how to speak gently even when the heart was breaking, how to find beauty in the smallest of things, a ray of light, a kind word, a moment of stillness. The nights passed, one after another. The routines never changed, but something inside them grew stronger, invisible, yet real. They learned that survival wasn't just about breathing. It was about remembering who they were before the world tried to erase them. Each whisper, each song, each secret story became a thread, and together those threads wove a quiet tapestry of resistance. They were women of the shadows, unseen, unheard, yet their hearts burned with quiet fire. And though the world would never know their names, their whispers still lingered, in the cracks of the old walls, in the dust that caught the candlelight, in the silence that followed every sigh. They had nothing, but they had each other, and sometimes that was enough to keep hope alive.
The Forgotten Daughters. The rain fell softly that morning. The streets were quiet, washed in gray light. And somewhere in the distance, a cart rolled through the mud, carrying 3 young girls who did not know where they were going. They were no more than 15. Their faces were pale. Their eyes searched for something familiar, a tree, a road, a voice. But there was nothing.
The cart stopped outside a large wooden gate. It opened with a slow, heavy sound, and as the girls stepped down, their lives began to disappear behind them. No one told them what this place was. No one said the word. They only saw women with tired eyes waiting by the doorway. Women who once looked just as young, just as lost. The youngest girl held her sister's hand tightly. Her fingers trembled. The older sister whispered, "Don't cry, just stay quiet." But her voice broke halfway through the sentence. Inside, the air was thick. Candles burned, smoke lingered, perfume and dampness mixed in strange confusion. The girls could hear laughter from another room, forced laughter that did not sound human. A woman approached them. Her dress was bright, her smile practiced, but her eyes told another story, one of exhaustion and unspoken pain. She spoke gently. "You'll get used to it here." They didn't understand what she meant. Not yet. That night they were given a small room, 2 beds, a bucket of water, a single candle that burned too quickly. The girls sat in silence. The older one tried to wash her sister's face. The water was cold, almost muddy. She whispered, "Tomorrow we'll leave." But deep down she knew there was no leaving. The next morning they met others. Women who moved like ghosts through narrow hallways. They smiled softly, nodded in silence, offered bits of bread. No one asked questions. Everyone already knew the answers. Some of the women had been there for years. They no longer remembered the faces of their families. Their old names were gone, replaced by names chosen for them. Names that sounded beautiful, but felt empty. Every new girl followed the same path. First came confusion, then fear, then silence. In the corner of the building, an old woman named Alina taught them the rules. Keep your head down. Do not argue. Do not cry where anyone can see. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. She looked at the youngest one and added, "If you want to survive, learn fast." At night, the girls listened to the sounds through the walls. Footsteps, whispers, laughter that ended in sobs. They could not sleep. The candle flickered. Tears fell without sound. Days turned into weeks. The routine became familiar. Washing, waiting, pretending, surviving. The younger one stopped crying after a while. She learned to move quietly, to hide her fear behind stillness. The older one stopped hoping for rescue. She began to understand the rhythm of the house, when food came, when voices softened, when it was safe to rest for a few minutes. But every night, before sleeping, she would whisper to her sister, "Remember who you are." It was the only thing she could give her, a memory, a name, a tiny spark of home. Some girls arrived by deceit. They had been promised work, a place to live, a better life. When they discovered the truth, it was too late. The doors had closed. Others were sold by fathers, by husbands, by debt collectors. Some never knew the reason. They only remembered being taken. One girl, called Laura, often stared at the ceiling and whispered, "Maybe someone is still looking for me." No one answered. But sometimes when she said it, another girl would squeeze her hand, not to promise hope, but to remind her she wasn't alone in despair. The women learned to find fragments of light in small things: a shared meal, a kind glance, a quiet laugh between tasks. Those moments did not erase the pain, but they kept the soul alive. Time in that place had no meaning. Days blended together like colors fading on an old painting. Only the newcomers reminded the older ones how far they had fallen. Every time a new cart arrived carrying another frightened face, the women felt their hearts break again. They saw themselves, their younger selves, stepping down from that cart, and they wished they could tell them to run. But they couldn't, because escape was only a dream whispered in the dark. Instead, they did what they could: a hand on a shoulder, a blanket shared, a word of comfort. These were their weapons against despair. Small, invisible, but powerful. The forgotten daughters of the Middle Ages did not live easy lives, but within their silence, they carried strength deeper than steel. They were sold, silenced, erased, yet they still found ways to be human. They remembered songs. They remembered kindness. They remembered each other. History never wrote their names, but if you listen closely, you can still hear their voices. In the rain that falls softly on forgotten streets, in the whisper of wind through old stone walls, in the quiet strength of every woman who endures. They were the forgotten daughters, but they never forgot themselves.
The night was quiet, too quiet. Only the sound of a dripping pipe broke the silence. Inside the old house, 5 women gathered in the smallest room, a storage corner where no one ever looked. Their faces glowed under a weak candlelight. At first, no one spoke. They simply sat together, breathing the same heavy air, listening to the same silence that ruled their world. Then Mara spoke, softly. "From tonight," she said, "we look after each other. No one gets left behind." The others nodded. No one asked how. They already knew. They understood the meaning of survival. That night became the beginning of what they later called the Circle, a secret bond, a silent promise made between women who had lost everything except one another. They shared what little they had: bread, water, cloth, time. If one fell sick, the others watched over her. If someone was punished, they eased her pain quietly. No one outside the circle ever knew, and that secrecy made it powerful. The circle had no leader, no written rules. It lived through whispers, gestures, and trust, the rarest thing in that place. They learned signals. A cough meant danger. A knock on the wall meant hide. A candle blown out meant stay quiet. Through these small codes, they built their own invisible world, a hidden world inside the one that trapped them. Every night, when the house fell silent, they met again. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat in silence, remembering that they were still alive. Their voices stayed low. Their words were careful. Yet in that silence, something powerful grew. Unity. Laura, the youngest, kept hope alive. "Maybe someday," she said, "someone will write about us." The others smiled sadly. They didn't believe it, but they liked to hear it. One night, Rhea fell ill with fever. Mara stayed beside her. She placed a wet cloth on her forehead and whispered, "Hold on, child. Morning always comes." Those words became their motto. Morning always comes. Even when they were tired, even when their bodies ached, even when their hearts broke, those words kept them alive. Over time, the circle grew. More women joined, slowly, carefully. They never called it rebellion, but it was. Each shared meal, each hidden act of care was a quiet defiance against cruelty. Each woman brought something. One knew herbs and made small mixtures to ease pain. Another could sew, mending torn dresses in secret. Another whispered jokes in the dark, just to make the others smile. Laughter was dangerous, but it was also medicine. It broke the silence even for a few seconds. Sometimes they dreamed of escape, not in plans or maps, just in stories. Stories of fields, of rivers, of air that smelled of freedom. Those dreams didn't make them weak. They made them human. One night, rain poured hard on the roof. The women sat close together, sharing warmth under a thin blanket. Mara looked around and whispered, "If they ever write about us, they'll say we were just shadows. But we're more than that. We are the ones who refuse to disappear." No one answered, but everyone felt it. The truth, the pride, the strength. The circle became their heartbeat, a secret rhythm beneath fear, a pulse that no one else could hear. When one was hurt, everyone felt it. When one smiled, the others smiled too. Their souls were tied together by invisible threads, threads fragile in form, but stronger than any chain. In the mornings, they went back to their work. No one could tell that the quiet girl pouring water or the woman sweeping the floor was part of a secret sisterhood. Every look, every nod, every shared glance meant something. A language without words, a world within a world. Their unity brought small victories. When one girl was too weak, another worked for her. When someone's food was taken, the others shared theirs. When fear tried to take hold, someone whispered, "Morning always comes." Those words spread slowly, quietly, like fire. It wasn't rebellion with battles or weapons. It was courage, silent courage, the kind that keeps people alive when the world forgets them. Years later, some vanished, taken away, lost to history. But the circle never died. It lived in the stories whispered by those who survived. It lived in the hearts of women who came after. And maybe even now, it lives in every woman who helps another in silence, in every quiet act of kindness that no one sees, in every whisper of compassion that refuses to fade. They were never saints. They were never heroes. They were just women, broken, scarred, and tired. But they held each other up when no one else would. And that made them stronger than history itself.
The risks of escape. The nights were long and dark. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every passing day, yet the whispers of hope continued. The women of the circle began to plan quietly. Nothing written, nothing spoken loudly. Every gesture mattered. Every glance could be a signal. Laura, still young, watched carefully. She learned how to move without making a sound. She learned which floorboards creaked, which doors had loose hinges, which paths led to shadows where no one would see. Planning was dangerous. Even the smallest mistake could be deadly. They remembered the stories of those who had tried before and failed. The first rule was patience. Never rush, never make noise, never trust too quickly. At night, they would gather in corners of the house where the candlelight barely reached. They whispered their plans, each word measured, each breath quiet. Maps were drawn in memory, not on paper. Steps were counted in silence. Every movement rehearsed again and again. They shared small knowledge. Which window could be opened without squeaking? Which door led to the alley behind the house? Which guards slept lightly and which was easy to avoid? But fear never left them. It clung to their skin like a cold shadow. One wrong move, one sound too loud, one glance in the wrong direction, and everything would be lost. And the punishments were severe. Those who were caught were beaten. Some were locked away in dark rooms for days. Some were forced to kneel for hours. Their hands or feet were tied. They were denied food or water. And the shame of being punished, haunted them longer than any wound. Even whispers were dangerous. If overheard, they could be questioned for hours. Sometimes questions came with threats, sometimes with public humiliation in front of the others. Yet despite the fear, the women learned courage. They knew that living without hope was worse than the danger of trying. Each small act of planning, each cautious step was a rebellion. They practiced silently. Laura would creep across the floorboards. Rhea would check the hinges of the doors. Mara would observe the guard's schedule. Every night, they tested their courage. They moved with precision, as if their lives depended on every step, because they did. One night, Mara whispered, "Tomorrow, we try again." No one argued, no one spoke loudly. They only nodded. Sleep was brief. Dreams were risky. Even imagining escape required courage. Yet those dreams kept their spirits alive. The first attempt was always the hardest. The heart raced. Hands shook. Feet moved silently, but every noise seemed louder than it really was. When caught, the punishment was immediate. A guard's belt or stick left marks on skin. The cries of others filled the hallways. Dark rooms swallowed those who failed. The fear was as real as the pain. But if successful, freedom was a momentary taste. A step outside the walls. The cold night air. The distant sound of life beyond the house. It was brief, fleeting, yet unforgettable. Even planning required intelligence. They had to know the guards' routines. They had to predict patrols. They had to memorize every detail of the house. And still, mistakes happened. A door squeaked. A candle flickered. A footstep was too loud. When it happened, silence turned into chaos.
Sometimes they were lucky. The guard looked away. A door closed just in time. A shout was muffled. And then, quietly, they tried again. The circle became their shield. When one girl faltered, another steadied her. When fear rose, someone whispered, "Morning always comes." Those words carried strength. They carried determination. Even with the dangers, the women dared to hope. Each small attempt, each cautious step was a rebellion. They practiced silently. The risk of punishment was real. The threat of pain was real. But the risk of staying silent was worse. Sometimes they observed the punishments. A girl caught trying to escape was forced to kneel for hours. A hand raised, a face slapped, a body bruised. It was a warning. It was meant to crush their spirit. And yet, in the darkness of their punishment, the circle whispered. They shared small notes of encouragement, a nod, a glance, a reminder. We are still alive. We still plan. We still dream. That knowledge became power. Even in the face of fear, they found strength. Even in pain, they found hope. The women learned that freedom was not just a place. It was a state of mind, a decision to move, to try, to survive, even if only in tiny steps. And so they practiced, carefully, patiently, silently. Each night brought a new lesson, a new observation, a new opportunity. And though many failed, the circle never gave up. The spark of hope kept growing. The whispers of escape, of freedom, of life beyond the walls, they could never be silenced. They were not free yet, but they were learning, they were planning, they were alive. And in that quiet persistence, they found courage stronger than any punishment. They found strength stronger than the walls around them. They found hope. Fragile, fleeting, and beautiful.
The price of defiance. The walls of the house held secrets. Not all whispered of hope. Some carried the weight of pain. Every attempt to escape was a risk. Every failure had consequences. And sometimes the cost was life itself. When a girl was caught trying to run, the punishments were immediate. A guard's belt or stick left deep marks on skin. Bruises formed within minutes. Cries echoed through the narrow hallways. Some were locked away in dark rooms for hours, sometimes for days. No food, no water, no warmth. Only silence, heavy, suffocating, cruel. The punishment was not only physical, it was mental. Every girl forced to kneel for hours before the others was reminded of her weakness. Public humiliation shattered pride. The shame clung to their minds longer than the bruises on their bodies. Those who returned from punishment rarely spoke. Their eyes were hollow, their voices quiet. They moved slower, careful not to draw attention. Yet the circle watched. They whispered words of comfort when no one else could. A hand on a shoulder, a soft nod, a reminder, you are still alive. Some girls were punished so severely that they did not survive. The house swallowed them quietly. A fever, untreated wounds, or a sudden strike. Death came swiftly and silently. When a girl died, the circle grieved in silence. No loud cries, no ceremonies, but their memory lived in small acts. A candle placed on the corner of the floor, a whispered name in the dark, a breath taken for the fallen. Mara, the eldest, would tell the younger girls, "We remember them, not for the pain they endured, but for their courage." Even in death, the women became symbols, symbols of defiance, symbols of strength in the face of a cruel world. The circle learned from every failure. They studied what went wrong: a door left unlocked, a shadow unnoticed, a noise too loud. They adapted. They became smarter, slower, more cautious. Every punishment, every death taught them a lesson. Some nights they sat quietly and imagined the girls who did not return. They told stories of their bravery. They spoke of how the fallen had tried to fight, to move, to breathe freely. These stories were sacred. They were the memory that kept hope alive. The threat of punishment was always present. It hung over every plan, every gesture, every whispered conversation. It reminded them that courage came at a price, and yet it did not stop them. The circle grew closer because of it. They protected each other with vigilance. They shared knowledge quietly. They trained themselves in silence. Even small acts mattered: a hand hiding a bruise, a shared meal to restore strength, a whispered warning before a guard passed. Every day was a lesson in survival. Every night was a rehearsal for escape. Every punishment, every loss sharpened their instincts. And still, despite the danger, the hope of freedom persisted. It burned quietly, like a candle in the darkest corner. They whispered, "Morning always comes," even when night seemed endless. Some girls would never see that morning. Their absence was felt deeply, yet their bravery became part of the circle's strength. Their stories whispered to the others, "Do not give up. Move carefully. Survive." The house was a place of fear, but within its walls, courage grew in silence. Every failure, every punishment, every death, it was a reminder of the stakes and a guide for those who remained. The women learned that defiance came with a price, and that price was sometimes too high. Yet defiance was necessary. It kept the mind alive. It kept hope alive. It kept humanity alive. In corners where no one looked, the circle remembered. They held close the names of the fallen. They honored their courage quietly. They carried their lessons forward. And slowly, they became stronger. Stronger than fear. Stronger than punishment. Stronger than the walls that tried to contain them. Every small act of resistance mattered. Every whispered plan, every silent observation, every shared look was a tribute to those who had paid the ultimate price. The circle understood something crucial. Life was fragile. Freedom was fragile. And yet, even in the darkest moments, courage could not be crushed completely. They knew the risks. They knew the punishments. They knew death could come for them. And still they planned. And still they hoped.
The first flight. The night was heavy with rain. Clouds pressed low and wind rattled the windows. But inside, the women of the circle were wide awake. Tonight, something different would happen. Laura had prepared for weeks. Every movement practiced silently. Every door, floorboard, shadow, and corner memorized. Every step calculated. Every breath measured. She glanced at Mara. A small nod passed between them. No words, only understanding. The moment had come. She crept through the house. Her heart raced. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was steady. She moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate. The guard slept lightly. Footsteps passed near. She froze.
then moved again, slowly, carefully. Every corner brought risk. Every creaking board could betray her. But she remembered the words whispered countless times. Morning always comes. The circle had prepared her. They had trained her to notice patterns, to wait for the right moment, to trust her instincts. She had learned from the failures of others. When she reached the outer door, she paused. The rain poured down, soaking her hair and clothes. Cold water stung her skin, but it reminded her she was alive. She pushed the door. It creaked slightly. She held her breath. No sound. The alley outside was dark. She moved quickly, every shadow a shield, every fence a test of her courage. Her heart beat in rhythm with her steps. She imagined the circle inside the house, their eyes watching silently, their hopes walking with her. She ran. The wind whipped her face. The rain soaked her clothes. Her muscles burned. Her lungs ached. And yet, she ran. She reached the edge of the city. The lights of the house disappeared behind her. For the first time in years, she breathed without fear of being caught. Far behind, the house slept. Inside, the circle waited, holding their collective breath. Then, a subtle sound came, a knock on the floorboard. It meant she had made it, alive. Cheers whispered in the shadows, not loud, not reckless, just enough to honor her courage. The women embraced in silence, a hand on a shoulder, a smile in the dark, a tear wiped quickly, unseen. Laura's flight became a symbol, a spark in the darkness. If she could escape, maybe others could too. The circle felt the weight of possibility, hope made tangible. They discussed quietly what she had done, how she had avoided the guards, how she had timed her steps, how she had remained calm under pressure. Each detail became a lesson. Each small act of courage became part of the collective knowledge. The circle grew stronger. Mara spoke softly. Tonight we learned that even in chains, courage can fly. Even in fear, hope finds a path. We carry Laura with us in every step we take. The women whispered, "Morning always comes." Their voices intertwined with rain and night, a rhythm of survival, a hymn of defiance. The circle now held proof that the impossible was possible. They had seen a plan succeed. They had seen freedom touched, even if just briefly. It was a reminder that their efforts, their patience, their courage, all mattered. The other women began to dream more boldly, not recklessly, but strategically. Every escape attempt now had a blueprint. Every movement now had a mentor guiding it, even if in memory. Even the youngest girls felt inspired. They believed in a future outside the walls. They had seen courage triumph, even for a moment. And that belief, as fragile as it was, carried them forward. They celebrated in silence, not with noise or laughter, but with quiet pride. A hand held, a shoulder touched, eyes meeting in understanding. Every glance said, "We are alive. We are learning. We will survive." Laura disappeared into the night, but she remained with them. Her courage became a ghost that walked with the circle, a lesson in persistence, a symbol of what careful planning, patience, and trust could achieve. The house felt different after that night. The walls seemed smaller. The shadows seemed less threatening. The women moved with a new rhythm, a rhythm guided by possibility. Even when punishment and fear returned, they remembered Laura. Even when despair crept in, They remembered courage. Even in silence, hope whispered again. Morning always comes. The first flight was more than an escape. It was proof. Proof that survival was possible. Proof that courage could not be fully contained. Proof that even in darkness, light could find a way.
The days after Laura's escape were different. The house felt smaller. The walls seemed less oppressive. A quiet energy moved through the corners, through the rooms, through the women. The circle had seen courage succeed. They had proof that escape was possible, and with proof came determination. Each woman observed carefully, every routine, every guard, every shadow. They took notes in memory. Every small detail mattered. Rhea, now stronger, led the younger girls through the steps. She whispered, "Observe first. Move only when safe. Patience is everything." They practiced quietly, each step measured, each breath controlled. The house was still dangerous. Footsteps echoed unpredictably. Creaking boards betrayed even the slightest movement. A door left ajar could ruin everything. Noise meant punishment. Silence meant survival. They rehearsed in the smallest corners. Shadowed hallways became training grounds. Floorboards marked, doors tested, hinges watched. Every night, Mara reminded them, freedom is not a single moment. It is the sum of many careful steps. The women learned from mistakes. Small errors could be devastating. A loud whisper, a misstep, a glance in the wrong direction, and punishment would follow. Punishments were severe. Beatings, isolation, kneeling for hours, food and water withheld. Dark rooms where time seemed endless. Yet the women persisted. They watched the failures of others. They learned from what went wrong. Every bruise, every cry, every shadowed lesson was absorbed into memory. The circle became a living guide. Hands helped one another across difficult paths. Whispers taught techniques in silence. Eyes passed secret signals. Each movement reinforced trust. Some nights, the younger girls trembled. Fear gripped them like cold chains. They imagined the punishments, the pain, the possibility of death. But each time, Rhea or Mara would whisper, "Morning always comes." Those words became a rhythm, a pulse that steadied nerves, a reminder that courage was practiced, not demanded. The women also learned to conceal emotions. A tear wiped quickly, a shiver hidden under blankets, fear acknowledged but not shown. Even small acts mattered. A hand offered to steady another, a whispered warning about a guard's approach, a subtle gesture that meant, "Wait, now move, now stop." They practiced timing. The guard's routines studied and memorized. Shift changes observed. Sleeping patterns noted. Maps were etched in memory. Every room, every stair, every corridor, every shadowed corner held a lesson. The circle discussed escape strategies quietly. Plans grew more sophisticated with each attempt. They considered distractions, pathways, and the weather. Rainy nights, darker corners, quieter floors, all were opportunities. Fear never left them. It was always present, lurking in every glance, every sound. But fear became a teacher. It taught caution. It taught patience. It taught survival. They observed Laura's successful escape repeatedly in their minds. Her courage became a blueprint, her calmness a model, her careful steps a lesson in timing and precision. Even the smallest members of the circle learned.
hands too small to lift buckets, steps too hesitant to move quickly. They adapted. They planned in their own ways. They studied, memorized, and rehearsed. Every night was a test. Every sound a potential danger. Every shadow a possible threat. Yet with each practice, confidence grew. With each lesson, courage strengthened. They understood that freedom required preparation, not haste, not recklessness, only careful, measured, persistent effort. Sometimes fear overwhelmed them. A sudden scream, a fall, a shouted warning. They paused. They breathed. They continued. The circle supported one another. When a girl faltered, another steadied her. When panic rose, someone whispered, "Morning always comes." Every act of support was a shield, every gesture a bond. They began to test small escapes, short runs within the house, hiding, moving, retreating, repeating. Each attempt was studied, every success recorded, every failure remembered. The women realized that the journey was as important as the goal. Each step of preparation, each rehearsal, each lesson in courage, they strengthened the circle. They strengthened themselves. Patience became their greatest weapon. Observation became their guide. Silence became their shield. And slowly, quietly, the circle began to move in the shadows. The youngest girls whispered signals to one another. The older girls corrected movements without words. Every step was careful, every breath deliberate. Hope was no longer fragile. It was practical. It was alive. It was trained. It carried them forward one careful step at a time. The women of the circle were no longer just surviving. They were learning, preparing, and planning. Their courage grew in the shadows. Their unity strengthened with every whisper. Their hope became a quiet, unstoppable force. And in the silence of the house, under the watchful eyes of the night, they realized something remarkable. Freedom was not given. It was earned, measured, and practiced. And they were ready to take it, one calculated step at a time.
Flight in the night. The night was alive with possibility. A gentle wind rustled the trees outside, carrying the faint scent of rain. Inside the house, the women of the circle moved quietly, their hearts racing with anticipation. Tonight, a few of them would attempt their first real escape. The lessons learned from Laura's flight had become a blueprint. Each movement, each breath, each gesture was planned meticulously. Mara gathered the women in their usual corner. Her voice was a whisper, but it carried authority. Remember what we've practiced: patience, silence, observation. Trust in yourself and in each other. The girls nodded. Some trembled, some swallowed fear, some felt their hearts pounding in their chests. But all of them shared a single, quiet determination. They would try. They moved through the shadows. The house, though familiar, was still dangerous. Floorboards creaked, doors shifted. A misplaced step could undo everything. Rhea led the youngest girls, her eyes sharp, her movements precise. She guided them past the patrols, past the sleeping guards, past every obstacle. Her whispers reminded them, "Wait, now move, slowly." The first girl, Elena, reached the outer door. Her hands shook slightly, but she steadied herself. The night air rushed to meet her. For a moment she paused, feeling the thrill of potential freedom. Then she ran. The circle inside the house held its breath. Every shadowed corner,
Every silent step was a heartbeat in unison. One by one, others followed. They moved in careful succession, each step guided by practice, observation, and courage. The alley outside became a corridor of liberation. The sound of rain muffled their movement, but it also made their hearts pound faster. Inside, the circle celebrated quietly. No loud cheers, no reckless laughter. Just hands held, shoulders touched, eyes meeting with pride. Every successful flight was a spark of hope. Every return to shadow was a lesson learned. Even those who had not yet attempted their escape felt the shift. The air seemed lighter, the walls less oppressive, the night held promise. The women whispered, "Morning always comes." It was no longer just a phrase. It was a rhythm, a pulse, a truth they could feel. Each escape was more than physical. It was psychological. It was the breaking of chains, even if momentarily. It was proof that courage could triumph even in the smallest measure. The first successful flights became lessons. They studied every movement, every decision, every breath. They recorded everything in memory. Mistakes were remembered. Successes were celebrated quietly. The younger girls learned rapidly. Even the smallest member of the circle could contribute. Each whisper, each signal, each step was essential. The circle itself became stronger. Trust deepened. Coordination improved. Hope became a tangible force guiding every action. The women also learned to manage fear. They accepted it, acknowledged it, and used it as a tool. It sharpened senses. It strengthened resolve. Sometimes the night was nearly perfect. The gods' shifts aligned with their plans. The rain covered every sound. The shadows protected every movement. Other nights were more dangerous. A misstep, a startled guard, a floorboard creak. Punishments reminded them why caution was necessary. But the successes outweighed the failures. Even small victories sparked joy, pride, and courage. The circle whispered together, sharing the emotions silently, their hearts united. And in those moments, they understood something remarkable. Freedom was not just a destination. It was the journey. It was the courage to move, to plan, to hope, to act. Every escape, successful or not, strengthened their bond. Each woman's courage became the foundation for the next. The stories of flights became myths within the house, whispered, studied, and remembered. Even the youngest girls dared to dream. They imagined running in the open fields. They imagined air that didn't smell of confinement. They imagined a life beyond walls and fear. The circle's unity became their greatest asset. They supported each other silently, protected each other with vigilance. Every glance, every whisper, every hand on a shoulder carried meaning. Through the night, as rain fell softly, the women of the circle moved in shadows. Their hearts beat in unison. Their steps were careful, their courage unwavering. They had learned that success required patience, precision, and trust. They had learned that hope could not be crushed. They had learned that freedom, even momentary, was worth every risk. And as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the women of the circle gathered once more in their secret corner. They counted their blessings quietly. They remembered those who had not yet attempted.
They celebrated those who had succeeded. The night had passed. The fear remained. The risks remained. But so did hope. And for the first time in years, the women believed, truly believed, that one day they could all be free.
The house had grown restless. The guards had noticed subtle changes. Footsteps that once went unnoticed now drew attention. A shadow lingered too long. A whisper seemed too loud. Their patrols became stricter. Windows were checked more often. Locks were tightened. Nighttime movements were scrutinized. The circle sensed it immediately. A tension hung over every corner, every hallway, every room. Fear returned, sharper than before, but experience had taught them caution. Mara gathered the women. Her voice was calm, firm. We cannot act recklessly. Every step must be calculated, every movement silent. Patience is our greatest ally. Rhea and Laura reviewed every plan. Lessons from past successes and failures were examined carefully. They devised signals, new paths, diversions, and rehearsed each in silence. The house became a chessboard. The guards, pieces moved by unseen hands. The women studied patterns. They anticipated patrols. They memorized every sound, every creak, every shadow. Fear was constant. It clawed at their minds, reminding them of past punishments. But it also sharpened their instincts. A misstep could mean pain or death, but a perfect step could mean freedom. They trained in the smallest corners. Shadowed hallways became classrooms. Every window tested, every door examined, every floorboard observed. Even the youngest girls learned quickly. Hands held tightly, eyes watched intently. Each whisper was a lesson. Each glance carried instruction. The women rehearsed escape in slow, deliberate motions. Every timing adjusted, every step measured, every breath controlled. When danger approached, signals were subtle. A cough, a shift in posture, a whispered word. They moved without panic, without haste. The circle grew stronger because of the heightened risk. They shared knowledge more openly. They protected each other with renewed vigilance. Every act of courage was reinforced by collective trust. They also studied failures carefully. Every capture, every mistake analyzed, adjustments made, plans refined. Knowledge became their greatest weapon. Punishments continued for those caught or suspected. Kneeling for hours, beatings, isolation, hunger. Pain was constant, but it no longer paralyzed them. It taught resilience. Night after night, the women practiced. Shadowed corridors echoed with silent footsteps. Signals passed between them like threads of light and darkness. Every movement, a rehearsal for freedom. Even when guards became stricter, the circle adapted. They moved slower. They observed longer. They trusted less to chance and more to planning. Hope persisted even under pressure. The women whispered, "Morning always comes." It was more than a phrase now. It was strategy, rhythm, and courage all in one. The house felt different. Fear was sharper, but skill and unity had grown stronger. The circle prepared for the night when freedom would not just be a glimpse, but a tangible reality.
Dawn of freedom. The first light of morning crept over the horizon. A gentle wind carried the scent of rain-soaked earth. Inside the house, the women of the circle moved quietly, their hearts synchronized with a single rhythm: hope. The years of fear, training, patience, and whispered lessons had led to this night. Every shadow observed, every step rehearsed, every moment of courage now culminated in action. Laura, Rhea, and Mara led the first group. Their movements were precise, every breath controlled, every glance deliberate. The guards were alert, but they could not anticipate the unity, the preparation, the silent intelligence of the women. Every diversion, every silent signal, every careful movement worked perfectly. One by one, the women slipped past the walls that had held them captive for so long. The cold night air kissed their skin. For the first time, some felt freedom in the air, not just in thought, but in every nerve, every muscle, every step. The circle had become more than a group of survivors. It was a force, a living testament to courage, unity, and perseverance. Even those who had failed before, those who had been punished, those who had watched others disappear, they now moved with determination. Each step a declaration: we will survive, we will be free. The youngest girls, previously timid and fearful, now ran with careful precision. Every movement practiced countless times. Every shadow a guide, every sound a signal. The alley outside became a corridor of liberation. The rain muted their steps, but their hearts thundered with exhilaration. Every footfall a heartbeat of triumph. Inside the house, silence reigned for a moment. Then Mara whispered, barely audible, "They are free." The circle had completed what once seemed impossible. Freedom was not just a dream, it was reality. The women embraced in the shadows, their eyes moist with tears of relief, pride, and joy. For some, the night would not be long. They would continue running, finding open fields, rivers, towns, and unknown horizons. But the circle knew their legacy was already immortalized in each other's hearts. Every hardship, every punishment, every secret lesson, every whispered word, all had led to this moment. The women moved as one, not as individuals. Their strength was collective, their courage intertwined, their hope indestructible. As dawn grew brighter, they paused on a small hill just beyond the city. From there, they could see the houses, the walls, the shadows that had once imprisoned them. But now they stood above it all. Mara spoke softly, her voice filled with emotion. "We have survived. We have learned. We have endured. And now we are free." The others nodded. No words could capture the depth of what they had achieved. The circle's unity, their shared courage, their perseverance, these were their triumphs. The women shared quiet laughter, not loud or reckless, but full of life. It was a sound of release, of healing, of hope reclaimed. For years they had lived in shadows. Now they were stepping into light. Even as they moved further into the open world, the lessons of the circle remained. Patience, observation, trust, courage. These were the gifts of the shadows. They were the tools that had carried them to freedom. The fallen were remembered in every glance, every silent step, every careful movement honored those who had been lost. The circle carried their memories forward, ensuring that courage and hope were never forgotten. And as the sun rose higher, bathing the world in warmth, the women of the circle understood a profound truth. Freedom was not given. It was earned. It was fought for, in silence, in shadow, in patience, and in unity. They had taken control of their destiny. They had written their own story, and in doing so, they became more than survivors. They became legends. Even far from the walls, they remained connected. Every whispered word, every shared glance, every act of courage, it bound them forever. The world outside would never know the full story, the pain, the courage, the sacrifices, but the circle knew. And that knowledge, that unity, that legacy was more powerful than any chain, any wall, any punishment. The women moved forward, step by careful step, into a life they had chosen. The night behind them was full of lessons. The dawn before them was full of possibilities. And in every heart, one phrase remained, whispered softly, carrying them into freedom. Morning always comes. They had survived the shadows. They had endured the punishment. They had outwitted fear. They had reclaimed their lives. And the circle, once hidden, silent and fragile, now existed in strength, courage, and light. History might forget the walls, the shadows, the punishments, but it would never forget the women who refused to disappear. The women who ran, who hid, who planned, who whispered, who cared, who endured. They had survived. They had thrived. They had become free. And in that freedom, the circle found their final triumph. Unity, courage, hope, legacy. The night had ended, the dawn had come, and the women stepped forward into a world that would never hold them again.